Awesome, Rory. Well, I appreciate you hopping on. Why don't you give us a quick introduction on who you are and who you serve?
Sure. So my name is Rory. I'm from New Zealand, though I currently live in Australia. Uh, I am a powerlifting coach. So mostly what that means is that I spend my time helping people be the sort of healthiest and strongest versions of themselves.
Nice, nice. I love that. I got my start, well, kind of. My goal was to be a high school strength and conditioning coach. So very much in that strong power area, especially with football. That's where I was going. Unfortunately, fortunately, the pandemic had other plans, and so that led me to online coaching. But what got you into being a powerlifting coach?
So it was a bit of a journey. So when I was in high school, I started doing martial arts, and I did martial arts for a really long time. Moved away for university, wasn't able to find a martial arts club that I liked, that I sort of vibed with.
Hmm.
So started going to the gym as like an alternative. And while I was there, I met some people who were powerlifters. I got pulled into powerlifting. I say that like it's a bad thing. It was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But like I got dragged into powerlifting, and this was before the days of good online coaching. Like online coaching
Sure.
was sort of nascent at the time, but it was sort of 2012 through 2014, social
Oh,
media a
okay.
little bit nascent, like all of
Yeah,
those kinds of things. And so what that meant is that none of us knew what we were doing.
sure.
And so there was sort of a group of us, and we would collectively troll through the bodybuilding.com forums and Reddit forums and
Hmm.
try to figure out like what was going on, and sort of piece together stuff. And so that started piecing together stuff for myself, eventually evolved into piecing together things for other people, and then eventually that evolved into sort of properly coaching, starting from scratch over the course of several years.
Yeah, absolutely. I found myself in the bodybuilding.com forum right around that time, 2011, 12, 13 era. I think that's where most people around our age probably gets their start because even YouTube at that time, I don't think was as much of a forefront for knowledge as it is now. Because now I think most people just YouTube everything, and they say YouTube's the second most search or the second highest used search engine besides Google, which is probably true. I think I probably use YouTube more than I do Google, unless I'm looking for like a very specific question. But if I'm looking for like anything, like how to do anything, YouTube, right? And so I think bodybuilding.com was that for us people trying to get into fitness back then.
Yeah, it's funny you say YouTube. I think I was lucky in that I happened across the very old Eric Helms muscle and strength pyramid videos that were like that they looked like they were filmed in about 360p, and it was just like him sitting in front of a whiteboard with a whiteboard pen. But they were like one of the very first YouTube videos that was like instructional about like
Yeah,
not just like, hey, I have gotten fit, but like, hey, this is what it means to get fit. This is like what factors are important.
yeah.
So I think that was quite good timing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then now, I mean, they got. I don't think Eric Helms is in Mass anymore, but they had Mass, and
Yep.
then all of the Stronger by Science is what I'm thinking of. And so, I mean, we see the powerhouse that they've become, which is good
Mhm.
because they're one of the few people who are very, very science based, right?
Yep.
And that's their whole. I don't want to say it's a niche, but that's their whole philosophy. Is this is what the literature says, and that's good, especially for people who are trying to be. Powerlifting is a lot different. Well, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be a lot more different than like normal, what I would consider more like normal gen pop type of coaching, where it's like, let's just get us moving. Let's just, if we want to get into the gym, let's focus on the fundamentals. Where powerlifting, it's like, we need to have all that ironed out so that way we can kind of push things to the max.
Yeah, it certainly can be. Of course, there are like different levels to it, right? Like there's people who are doing their first powerlifting meet for whom hey, let's start with like getting to the gym a couple times a week, like
Yeah.
perfectly appropriate start. But particularly by the time that like I meet people, or by the time they reach out to me, they've already got all of that stuff down.
Hmm.
The question is not like, are they going to make it to the gym? It's how do they get the extra 5 to 1% out of their training.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in college, undergrad, I was doing I did an internship under a professional sports performance facility. So we were working with Olympic level athletes, NHL and NFL specifically as well, and it was very much we were pretty much just glorified cheerleaders, right? There was no motivation in it. Like we were just saying, all right, awesome, you could do more. Let's maybe throw on an extra 5 pound plate and maybe squeeze out another rep. Mostly just spotting and counting reps as well,
Hmm.
because they have spent their whole lives building that foundation and framework. We didn't really have to say, move your feet this way, this, correct your form essentially. And in that same facility, I was also coaching high school athletes. We coached everyone from like 7-year-old youth to professional elite level. So we got that whole spectrum. And like on the high school side, it's like the exact opposite, right? We really need, they're doing all sorts of things wrong. Their ego is getting in the way. And we really need to just overall fix their form. And so I can definitely see both divides to where the elite, we're squeezing out that 1, 2, 5%, like you said, which is the difference between like first and ninth place if we're talking like the Olympics. But with high school athletes, we're going for like 100% to like 200% gains because by just tweaking their form and getting them used to movements they'd never done before. And I gravitated towards that because I felt like that was in my opinion more rewarding, and that's why I was going to more high school. And then the pandemic shifted me to online, which I still work with noobs in a sense,
Hmm.
and so I see it rewarding. But cool. So what martial arts were you doing?
So Taekwondo was my main one, but I also sort of dabbled in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and then a couple of other things to a lesser extent. But I was doing a form of Taekwondo called IMA, which is like not very common. It's not what they do there at the Olympics. Yeah, so I did that for about 8 years, from like intermediate school right through to the end of high school until I sort of left for university.
Oh, nice, nice. I know BJJ is like very common, like throughout the world, right?
It is, yeah. I feel like there's a bit of a pipeline of powerlifter to BJJ or like bodybuilder to BJJ. I feel like I've just like done that backwards.
I would agree. There's definitely I see a lot of people like Dr. Mike Israel.
Yep.
He's getting into BJJ or just some form of jiu-jitsu. I don't know if it's exactly Brazilian. But also I know Lane Norton wants to, but he says he only wants to do one sport that can hurt himself. And so right
Yeah.
now he's still doing powerlifting. And I actually work with another coach, or I don't work with him. He's a colleague of mine, but I know him. He lives in Australia, and he's pretty big into jiu-jitsu of some sort. I don't know exactly if it's Brazilian.
Hmm.
I just assume all jiu-jitsu is Brazilian, and he seems to like it. So I don't know if it's something in the water in there over in Australia.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Cool. So what? I think you mentioned this, but forgive me if I missed it. You got into martial arts, and then you kind of, like you said, got turned to the dark side of powerlifting while at the gym. Is that right? You kind of fell out of, I don't want to say out of love, but maybe a little less motivation to do martial arts and more on powerlifting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I wouldn't say out of love either. There was like still very much interested in martial arts, but I couldn't find a club that I liked. As you might know that martial arts clubs sort of exist on the spectrum between sort of particularly where I grew up, like sort of run by gangs for the express purpose of teaching people to hurt each other, through to like so gentle and family friendly that you can't get a good training session in. And ideally, most people fall sort of somewhere in the middle of those, like right, or want to fall somewhere in the middle of those. And like I couldn't find somewhere that was that for at the
Right.
time.
Okay. Yeah, I have a good buddy that I helped train. He's a judo player, and we worked together for a year. And he had a huge issue with the gym that he was working at. His coach left, and he's like, "Man, I have to." He was in the DC area, so he had a lot of gyms to choose from, respectively. He was like four, and he was like, "Man, these all just suck." It's like they're either run by people who are not, they really shouldn't be leading. Like you said, they're maybe more like white belt style. Like they can teach like any newbie, but anytime they're like a competitor, you're not going to learn anything. And then, or they're teaching people dangerously, and then people get hurt. And so I can definitely see that. And he said it was very political too. He's like, it's borderline culty, to use his words.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. That's I think that's universal for martial arts actually, which is I guess the dark side of it.
yeah, exactly. Like you said, they're pulling you into the dark side. Um, and so, yeah, I can definitely see how you'd have, almost like each gym or dojo, whatever you want to call it, has their own unique feel. And if you're not vibing with it, then you're not going to mesh well with them. They're not going to mesh well with you. Then you're not going to see the results that you want. And so I think powerlifting might be a little bit more unanimous.
Yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't exactly call powerlifting like homogenous. There's certainly still like variation within it. But I
Yeah,
find it much
absolutely.
easier to find a gym that I fit into in powerlifting, even when I move around.
Sure. And speaking of moving around, I was going to ask you, you went from New Zealand to Australia. What sparked that?
Yeah, right. So in the background while I was coaching, or I guess the coaching was in the background, I was working in software. And so first
Okay.
job out of university, I was working for the sports tech company. We were trying to make software to help triathletes train better. And so that was like a really good mesh because although the sports are really, really different, the principles of triathlon training are identical to powerlifting training and pretty much every other training. So worked there for a while, and eventually sort of just like stepped through a number of software jobs, and eventually got headhunted for a software role here in Australia. Wasn't really looking to move, but was definitely looking to get out of New Zealand at the time. So opportunity came up. I was like, yeah, cool, sounds great. So moved to Australia, and at that time I sort of dropped down to working sort of 4 days a week in software and
Okay.
2 days a week of powerlifting coaching. So probably working a little bit too much overall, but I was getting like that, like a good mix of a couple of different things that were important to me at the time.
Yeah. Well, building your own coaching, you're an entrepreneur. I don't think there's a way to be a successful entrepreneur while having a healthy work-life balance, at least in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you going into software, and you were just talking about how you were early on in online coaching. So were you developing your own like coaching platforms and stuff like that, or platform
So
singular?
in I guess serendipitous timing. My first powerlifting coach was one of the founders of My Strength Book, and so he was, he developed My Strength Book. He's like, hey, can you use this as like a test person initially? So I used it initially as an athlete while I was being coached by him. And then sort of 18 months later, they were like, hey, we've created a coaching portal. I know you do a little bit of coaching. Can you use the coaching portal and then just provide us feedback? So I was like one of the first coaches to come onto My Strength Book using the coaching portal. Prior to that, I was using sort of like the standard, I guess the standard tech stack for online coaches of like Google Sheets and emails and Facebook Messenger and, like sort of a conglomeration of those things.
Yeah.
But that's really changed the way that I coach now. And so I guess I'm all in coaching wise on My Strength Book.
Okay. Is that the one where you? I think I had a powerlifting buddy of mine who was coaching, and it was like unique because you only pay per client versus like Trainerize where you pay per roster cap. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, it's per client per day. And so, if you have somebody who joins partway through a month or something, you don't even pay the full month for that person.
Oh, it gives you prorated.
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. So it's it works out really, really well, and you can sort of just like add and remove people dynamically. No, you never hit a cap. It just, I don't know, it works really well. It's designed specifically for powerlifting coaching, which obviously is fantastic for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what? So I guess a good question, and this might be obvious, but I want to hear it from you. What are you looking for in a powerlifting app versus something like Trainerize or Everfit, which is more Gen Pop related, or we'll say general purpose?
There are a few things that I want out of it, but I think first and foremost, I want the experience for my clients, for my athletes to be good. I think that's one of the more important things to me. If it makes my life really easy, but it adds a lot of friction for them, that's not a good trade-off in my opinion.
Right.
So what I want is for them to be able to just sort of pick up their phone or pick up their laptop or whatever their form factor they're using, open it, and for everything to be easy, obvious. They don't need to spend a ton of time sort of messing around trying to figure out what is what. At my end, the things that take up a lot of time at my end is like programming is the one that probably takes up like the most time. And so anything that makes that process smoother is good. So the actual writing of the program being faster is excellent, but pre-built metrics or measures to determine what has been or hasn't been effective also helps a lot, because the diving back through data trying to figure out what has been working and hasn't been working on Google Sheets or something a little bit painful. So being able to do that faster and more easily is a really good thing as well.
Okay. Can you give examples of that?
Of like specific measures?
Yeah, like what examples of what you'd be looking for. Was this effective? Was this not?
Sure. So one of the things that I will typically be looking for is the change in estimated one rep max over the course of a training block.
Okay.
And obviously that's not always going to increase. It's not always going to increase linearly, but it's not the most precise measure either. Like it can vary quite a lot, sort of individual to individual, or depending how accurate they are with numbers and percentages and stuff, so on.
Yeah. Plus day by day.
Yes. But being able to see trends in that is really useful, particularly when what we ultimately want to see is one rep max increasing.
And so when you say you're looking for something that would be conducive to increasing one rep max, are you specifically looking at, okay, we did this bench progression and their 1RM didn't go up, or stuff more like supplemental, like dumbbells, tempo, like that type of stuff?
All of the above. I tend to start with sort of total training load as being the starting point, and so that would include bench press, but also the dumbbells and the accessory movements and so on and so forth. And so long as that is right or close to right, then I will start looking into sort of specific ordering of exercises, specific selection of accessory movements, things like that. But if the total training load is massively wrong, then like looking at the details is just not really a good use of time, right?
Sure. How do you determine what an appropriate work volume is? Work total volume?
Trial and error. So starting at something that I expect is going to be reasonable based on their previous training history and sort of my experience working with other people, and then sort of adjusting up or down to the point that they are seeing progression over time, but that they are not starting to accumulate sort of various aches and pains through the course of training.
Yeah, like I know overtraining is kind of a buzzword, but that's kind of what you're alluding to.
Yeah, like
General fatigue.
We'll say general fatigue. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that they build up an appropriate amount of general fatigue over the course of a training period, and are not constantly in pain.
Yeah, like that state of burnout. I know a lot of people when they think, well, people in our fields when they think overtraining, they probably think of like rhabdo, but like burnout in general can be a form of overtraining.
Yes, very much so. Like I think you would have done something quite wrong if one of your clients is getting, or particularly if more than one of your clients is getting rhabdo. But burnout much more common.
Yeah, for the record, I've had 0 clients have rhabdo.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Which is funny because my that client that I was talking about that worked doing judo, he was stupid. He was doing like 12 or 14 hours of training, combining judo and our strength and conditioning. And so it was a high volume for most people, about 14 hours a week. And he went to the doctors and his ATK levels were high.
That sounds right. Yep.
There's a liver enzyme that's high. And I was like, did they say like you're flirting with rhabdo? And he looked it up and he's like, oh, look, 90% of cases that have rhabdo have elevated, I think, ATK for the sake of this example. And he's like, she didn't even bring it up. I'm like, you obviously don't have rhabdo because that's very dangerous. But what I think your doctor was saying and what I'm saying is might need to pump the brakes. And so it was like he had elevated enzymes in his liver saying scientific, like actually data points, hey, this is overtraining. And so he was also going through a lot of like work stress. He has a very high performing job. And so there was a lot of compounding factors. And we needed to just adjust for that, and we actually had blood markers to suggest it, so that was kind of unique. But it's interesting that you say that because it sounds like you almost do like an opposite approach of what I would do with like a Gen Pop client, to where you say, okay, this is where we are now. This is the type of work volume that you're used to. Let's figure out what we can do with this work volume, and the workout length will be secondary to that, correct?
Yeah.
I'm like the opposite. I'm like, okay, you only have 30 minutes to work out. Let's see how effective we can make these 30 minutes in the gym. And it's just based on goals. Like if you're working with powerlifters, they want to try to get as strong as possible while being as safe as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, some people don't want to be as safe, but
I'm going to make them be safe, whether they particularly want that or not. But no, that's right. Like I have people coming to me and they say, look, hey, I want to win nationals. I want to get selected for an international team. And the answer is something like, hey, if you want to get selected for an international team, this is what people are doing when they get picked for an international team. Are you willing to do that? And if the answer is yes, then cool, let's go for it. And that can mean that people are in the gym for 1.5 to 2.5 hours on like a pretty regular basis. So
yeah. Yeah, this is a complete side story, but I had a call with a prospect last week. Yeah, I think it was last week, and he said he spends 3 or 4 days in the gym. I can't remember, but 4 hours at a time. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, we need to hop on a call. And so again, not a client of mine, but a prospective client. And I was like, what are you doing in the gym? Not like accusatory, but I'm like interested. And really, ultimately, what it boiled down to was he would just kind of go at his own pace. He just really enjoyed being there. The gym was kind of like a spa for him. It was like his safety place. And I'm like, okay, so that's not bad. Like, if I thought he was doing like an hour of cardio, then he does an hour of weight training, and then another hour of cardio, then an hour in the sauna, like that type of stuff, I'd have been like, look, I don't even care if you sign up. You just can't keep doing that. Like, something needs to change. But for him, it was just like he goes at his own pace. And he would definitely be an exception to the rule, where I can guarantee majority of people do not want to spend 4 hours a day at the gym. Hell, I didn't even want to spend 4 hours when I worked there, when I worked in the gym.
No, no, I don't want to spend 4 hours at the gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
That's why I do online. I don't have to spend any hours in the gym besides when I'm working out. So what sparked the interest in doing online when it was very much in its infancy in the early 2010s?
So it was initially largely about flexibility, because I was originally it was originally the side thing for me, right? So I was studying biomedical engineering. Didn't really know where I was going with that, though I did end up sort of veering into software, and so like I had a whole other career, obviously engineering degree, like reasonably demanding on time and so on. So when I was getting started, it was just like, well, I can't afford to be in the gym at the same time as the people that I am, working with being in the gym
Sure.
regularly. So online seemed like the nice form factor to start with. And then what I found, and what I think a lot of online coaches find, is that particularly for something like powerlifting, the technical aspect is reasonably stable. And so, particularly for people who are sort of like intermediate and above lifters, the technical aspect is reasonably stable. And so, sort of the minute to minute feedback that you're able to give when you are physically in the gym with somebody is not that valuable when
Right.
somebody is technically really good already, and when their technique changes very slowly. And so it is perfectly reasonable to give feedback 24 hours after something happens, or 48 hours after something happens. And that is almost never a big deal.
Yeah. I I will also say that's probably the case for most people in general, because even if you're working with a novice, you're not going to be having them do barbell back squats, right? So you're going to have them do exercises that they are within their comfort zone, maybe nudging them slightly outside of their comfort zone. So when I work with people doing all body weight movements, I feel comfortable enough for them to do it to where I'm not watching them, because we don't do Zoom follow along workouts, and it sounds like you don't either, to where I don't have to worry about them getting an injury because they did a body weight squat wrong, right? And so I feel like most people, if you give them workouts that are appropriate to their level, can do workouts on their own. The movement's totally fine, and that's why I really like online coaching, because even when I was an in-person coach, I felt like I was, again, like a glorified cheerleader, but I also felt like a shark. I was just circle around them, just looking for their form, and then they're like, was that 7 or was that 8? I'm like, not paying attention to their reps. I'm like, you got 2 more. Whatever it was always 2 more. And so, like, critiquing their form, and I just felt kind of like what you were saying, there's a better use of time. And I would
Yep.
rather take that hour and focus on having like a consultation or a check-in call, and like, how's your work life? How's stress? How's your nutrition doing? Which I want to talk about with you in a second. And then other things. And then if they are concerned about form, they can send me form videos, and then I send them a Loom video critiquing it back. And that becomes very effective, because those are the people who are doing more compound movements, deadlift, squats, etc. And they want that extra help. And a lot of times it's like real, and I'm sure you notice this, it's like small tweaks. Like, you just say one verbal cue properly, and that's the thing that the light bulb goes off, and then their form gets really tight, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's just, and it just ends up like way more efficient time wise for us as coaches, and therefore cheaper for them as clients. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need to watch an hour of squats a week to know if you're doing it well. I can watch 3 videos of 3 different sets and be like, yeah, that was fine, or like, small cue, small change, and that's usually sufficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you are doing powerlifting, where I assume you're working 4 or 5 times a week, that can get very expensive in person.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like an hourly rate for four, say 1.5 hour sessions. That ends up being prohibitive for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one thing I do when I kind of do a price anchor. Not an anchor, but I give like a price range of what we do. I'll say like on the more extreme end, you're working 3 to 5 times in person, and if you are just doing like a standard, roughly $100 an hour, which is very on par with a lot of places, that can get to like over $1,000 a
Yep.
month, which isn't insane.
Yep. Not many people willing to do that, I don't think.
No, no. And another thing with online versus in person, online I can create a 7 minute bedtime stretch routine, right? Like you're not locked into a 30, 60, 90 minute time block, and that's what I really like because it sounds like you do something very similar.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. Talk to me about nutrition. Obviously, that's a huge part for really anything you're trying to do. But what do you do for nutrition?
Yeah, so I actually offer nutrition separately to powerlifting coaching, which so follows a very similar structure as far as coaching goes. So sort of like weekly nutrition check-ins. For many powerlifters, that starts with sort of counting macros as like a base. I tend to refer to that as being sort of like the foundational skill set for the more interesting skills that follow on afterwards. Though of course it doesn't have to be based around macro counting. That's not appropriate for everyone. But largely, what I'm focused on is making the time in the gym feel as good as possible, and so that's what we would
Okay.
call like performance nutrition. And so that's sort of the step beyond sort of getting enough protein, getting enough carbs, so on and so forth. But making sure that you're eating your carbs at the right time, making sure that you're fueling that workout appropriately, so that when you are in the gym for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, that you are actually able to make the most of that, and then recover in time to make it to the next session in good shape.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I say to most people, meal timing doesn't matter, but I would assume your clientele, as high of performers that they are exceptions to that rule, right? And
Yep.
so, I mean, meal timing does matter because you don't want to go to the gym after having like a massive dinner, but you also don't necessarily need to plan how many carbs you're eating, how many grams of protein you are for the gen pop. But somebody who is trying to be to the peak of their performance, absolutely.
Yeah, and when we start with nutrition, usually it's starting with getting an appropriate amount of food, getting an appropriate amount of
Yeah.
protein, just like across the day as a whole, and then sort of like refining that skill set over time to the point that you may end up at the point where you're going, hey, look, I want 80 grams of carbs 2 hours before I work out or something. But not many people need to start there.
Yeah, it's like stepping over dollars to pick up pennies for most people because they're like, well, how many grams of carbs should I eat before this? I'm like, just fucking focus on eating enough. Like, just focus on
Yeah.
eating properly. Try not going to Taco Bell right before the gym. Like, let's focus on that first. Let's create the habits first, and then we can work on improving them. And I always love that because then this is going to be segued into what I was going to ask next. It's supplementation, and people will ask me, what supplements should I take? I'm
Yep.
like, you need to focus on getting at least 100 grams of protein before anything else. And so obviously your clientele is going to be a little bit different. So what do you do for supplements?
I almost exclusively work with tested athletes. And so, given that, I tend to suggest that people get the basics of nutrition down before they even think about
Yeah.
supplementation. There's not many supplements that I recommend for everybody. If I am going to recommend something to people, I would say look at creatine. That's something that you should consider. Caffeine and caffeine timing, though a lot of people are already like having caffeine day to day, so that's not
Yeah.
usually such a big deal. Um, that's the typical starting point, and I'm very cautious to recommend much beyond that if people don't already have everything else sorted out.
Yeah, I am 100% on board with that as well. It's kind of a meme now, but it's like, your daily reminder, take your creatine. I love creatine monohydrate specifically. I think that is something that pretty much anybody can take and see results because it also has not only like muscle building effects, but also like cognitive abilities or
Mhm.
cognitive effects. And so, and also apparently it aids in concussion recovery. I just found that out too.
Oh, I
And
didn't know
so if
that.
you,
That's interesting.
yeah, yeah. So especially in martial arts, you get kicked in the head, you get a concussion. Excuse me, you like quadruple your daily dose for like a week or so, which could cause GI distress. So be careful with that. But it can help with the recovery process because it does go to the brain. So it can help
Interesting.
with that. Yeah,
Just
yeah,
on a similar note, something that I end up working with a lot of clients with is sleeping more. So people come and
yeah,
be like, "Hey, what supplements should I be taking?" I'm like, "Man, you're sleeping 6 hours a night. How about the first supplement that you take is 8 hours of sleep?"
yep,
And then we can and then we can talk about other stuff when you can do that consistently.
yep.
Sorry,
Uh,
little bit of a tangent.
No, 100%. I work with gamers, and so sleep is always a point of contention when they're like, "Well, I was up till 3 a.m., playing this or watching this." I'm like, "Okay, well, let's work on dialing that in first, because even if we have the perfect program, like perfect strength program, perfect nutrition plan, it's going to mean dick if you were sleeping 5 hours a week or 5 hours a night.
Yep. Yep.
Nice. The only other supplement I will sometimes say is if people struggle with protein, especially if they skip breakfast, I'll say have like a protein bar and a protein shake. So that way you get like 50 grams in the morning. But again, that's supplemental, right? That's meant to be kind of a crutch while we build the habit of having a breakfast, and then we can improve on that habit. And so
Yeah.
that is one addition that I'll
Same.
say to
Yeah.
that.
Like order of preference is protein from a complete food source. Then like supplemental protein, and then like least preference is not getting the protein at all. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, good, better, best. That's how I like to see it. Cool. What type of coaching philosophy or let's say training philosophy do you have? Because I know in the strength conditioning world, this is probably similar. There's a lot of different like what type of periodization you want to do. You got linear, we got conjugate, we got West Side, which is this whole own beast. Like what type of overall training philosophy or periodization philosophy do you have?
I would call my training philosophy like hypothesis driven training, and that largely what we're doing is we're taking a educated guess as to what people are going to respond to, what they're going to enjoy, what's going to fit into their life, the way that they need to fit it into their life, trying it, and then seeing if we get the response that we were hoping to get hoping to get or not. And so that's the starting point for most things that I do. I think probably my clients get maybe even a little bit frustrated when they say, "Hey, what's the answer to this?" And I'm like, I can tell you what the general answer is. I can't tell you what the answer for you as an individual is necessarily. But we
Yep.
can take a guess. And most of these experiments are really low risk, right? Like,
Hmm.
hey, what's the right amount of protein? Well, I think it's probably going to be this. But if you want to try going higher for a couple of weeks and see if you feel better, that's really easy experiment to try. And if it doesn't work, it's really easy to stop doing it as well. So
Yeah.
that's the sort of starting point. As far as like a periodization philosophy, I'm not like in love with any particular periodization philosophy. I do tend to use like a classic triphasic approach as like a
Okay.
starting point a lot of the time. Um,
I think I have that book.
oh yeah,
I know I have the book. It is. It's right there. You can't see it. It's too small, but it's right there. The
yeah,
Cal Dietz one. It's right
oh
by
yeah.
Super Training, another book that I have not read.
Oh, I have super training is sitting on my dining table at the moment. I'm about like 80% of the way through it at the moment.
Oh, geez, that thing's dense.
It's a
So kudos for
monster.
you
It's
getting
taken me a
80%
long
through.
time. I'm sort of doing like 25 pages a day, just like trying to get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I said, I'm not in love with any particular periodization philosophy. If so, that'll be where my starting point most of the time. But
Uh-huh.
if it's not working or if somebody's not enjoying it, totally willing to throw that out and try something different instead.
Yeah. So what would be like an extreme case? Because obviously, kind of like two extremes. You have linear or more traditional periodization, which is let's kind of start maybe on the higher reps and then taper down to like lower reps closer to whenever our meet tournament is. And then you have non-linear, which is we're just going to throw everything at you all at once. And so one day you're going to be like high reps, and the next day you're going to be like super low reps, and it helps kind of keep the nervous system, muscle confusion, all that bullshit. Um, so if would you have somebody who's doing a more traditional path, and they're like, what, I want more spontaneity, and then have them do like something undulated or nonlinear, or do you kind of have like a rail that you keep them within the rails?
I tend to sort of guide people in between the rails, but if they really want to do something like that, then basically I'm willing to try and make it work to make sure that they are enjoying training as well as it being effective. And so like most commonly, particularly for the clients that I work with, that's people still wanting to be able to get a little bit of a pump or something while sort of being focused on powerlifting training. And so that it can end up looking a little bit like a sort of daily undulating periodization kind of thing, where most of the time they're working in the 1 to 6 rep range, and then one day a week or even one day a fortnight sometimes they have a bench day where they go in and they hit a 3x10 and then an AMRAP at 60% or something. Like, is that on paper the most optimal training? Like, probably not. But if it keeps them otherwise on the rails, then that's pretty
Yeah.
useful.
Yes. I like that because it's saying, hey, 90% of the time we're doing what the science suggests, but also realizing that 10 to 20% needs to be given for more fun, or the ego days where we're going to stay within the realm of safety for sure, but we're going to really get one hell of a pump, and that keeps you motivated. And that philosophy is very much on par with what we do, and that's, again, I can create the perfect program, but it's not going to mean anything if you don't do it. And so I kind of, to take a step back, I kind of have this theory or philosophy that there are like 3 tiers to coaching quality. And the first tier is your 18-year-old who's always been in shape, and he says, this is what I do to look like this, so this is what you're going to do because I said so, type of thing. Those are your bad coaches, right? I think everybody eventually starts there, but those are your shit coaches. Then you have your good coaches who probably have some form of either formal training or just a lot of their own self-education, and they say, this is what we're going to do because the science says so, right? They know why we do everything, but they don't really have the knowledge to tailor it to somebody if their preferences are quote-unquote subpar. And then you have what I call a great coach, and those are the ones that understand, like, we don't need to do everything that's 100% optimized to science. We need to do what's optimized to your preferences and lifestyle, which might be counterintuitive to science. And so as long as what we're doing is something that you enjoy, that is stepping you towards your right goals, then it's a win, right? And that's kind of like in line with what you were saying, where this might not be quote unquote optimized for science, but it might be optimized for fun, and that's what we need some days.
Yeah, I would actually be interested in your take on this, but I was thinking the other day, and I realized that it had been years since I had been frustrated with someone for having like low adherence to a plan, and I was trying to figure out like why I no longer cared about that, or why that was no longer like a source of contention. Because like when I was first starting coaching, and probably I was in the first or second category, like maybe first evolving into the second category, I was like frustrated by people like not following the plan all the time. And now I very rarely have people not follow the plan, or if they don't, it just doesn't bother me particularly. And I wonder if it's because I now understand that people doing it is more important than whatever's on the paper. And
Yeah.
that the autonomy of the athlete to be able to help guide what's on the paper to begin with helps them buy into the rest of it. And so even if they only have 1 or 2 ideas that they put up and they say, hey, I'd really like to try a hack squat next program. And I'm like, I don't think that's really good for you, but like we'll throw it in and like we'll put it in and you can totally go for it. And then they love the rest of it because they've had a hand in shaping it.
Yeah.
Thoughts, input? Like, have you seen something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, my assistant coach and I just had a call today about this, to where she had a client who wanted to do bench press. And she's like, okay. I mean, I had no idea that you wanted to do bench press, but we'll throw it in. Absolutely. And so it's one of those things where if you give them an inch, that's enough for them to go a mile, type of thing, without like taking advantage. But I'm a big fan of that. And it reminds me of a story. I forget what strength coach it was. It might have been Ron McKeefrey, but he was saying how he'll program like the main part of the workouts for his athletes, but then at the end it'll be like buys and tries, to where do whatever curl you want, do whatever tricep you want, have fun, but the most important thing is we're getting that joint action in and working those muscle groups. And so there's allowing that autonomy, especially towards the end of the workout where you're getting that burnout. And then once you do that, it really reinforces that buy-in, because they're an active participant in the coaching process or the program development. And that's a big part of my philosophy, to where I want our clients to be active participants in the program. I don't want them to be, yes or no sir type of people, because they're A, passive, B, not learning anything, and then C, they're the master of their own domain. So I'm probably not going to create the best workout program for them if they're not giving the proper input. And so I really like that. And to go back to D&D, I do the same thing with my players to where they become integral in the story progression, and not only like obviously they progress to the story because they're the players, but they help develop the story as it goes rather than them just following the rails and getting railroaded. This might be outside of your domain, but there's a huge thing in D&D where if they're being railroaded, it becomes very demotivating to even play because they feel like they're just NPCs in the DM's game.
Oh no,
And
I
then
play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was just thinking in the campaign that I'm playing at the moment, I think we threw the rails out a little while.
yes, as a DM, I know the rails are not really a thing, and
Yeah.
so I've learned to under prepare for my campaigns because for my sessions because I know no matter what they're going to throw shit at me that I did not expect, and so over preparing in one direction can be horribly detrimental if they go way over here, which they almost will always go over here, and so I always try to under prepare but be more generalized, if that makes sense.
Starting to get a little tangential here, but something I've started to do as a player, I don't DM very often, but as a player, I've started to try and encourage the rest of the group to make the direction decision at the end of the current session rather than the beginning of the following session,
Oh,
which is
okay.
how people often try to do that.
Hmm.
In order to like help the DM a little bit. You face a choice and we go, hey, let's make the choice now before next week's session, so the
Yep.
DM knows at least the starting point for the direction that we're going to go in, to try and relieve the pressure on her a little bit, because I know that we do cause her the odd headache.
Yep. Yep. I was just talking to uh, another guest about how I prep. Before I would prep everything out, and I would have like quite literally like 10 pages of just text, walls of text, color coded for different dialogue scripts and everything like that. And so it would cost me like 4 hours per 1 hour played is how much I would prep. And then I read this book called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. It might be up there. It might not. But it's all about taking the story beats and secrets and lore that you want, but removing it from everything.
Mm,
And I really like that because the example I used was, let's say you are in a kingdom and the king is a werewolf. They're suffering from lycanthropy. And you make it so only his inner council knows. And you need the players to know. And so you only can get the only way the players can learn is if they're talking, if they somehow find a way to commune with the inner council. And that can be very railroading, and it can also stall the campaign because they're not going to know how to get to that point. Or you can have it so maybe they're in the inn and they hear whispers of rumors, or they're out hunting just on the outside of the kingdom, and then they see a couple of druids trying to perform a ritual to cure the king. And like, if you just say the king, excuse me, if you say just the king, if you just say that the king is suffering from lycanthropy, and leave it removed from everywhere else, you can just drop that point right in front of them. And so it's like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, but you're only dropping like one breadcrumb at a time right in front of them. And I really like doing that, and it saved my prep so much. It'll take like it cut my prep down by like 75%. Like I might prep 4 hours for a 4 hour session instead of 16 for a 4 hour session.
yep.
And so it's fun and it's nice. And I DM a lot. I'm the forever DM. I'm cursed with that. But I'm fully aware of how chaotic players can be, and I like the idea that you have them come up with at least some semblance of a plan before or at the end of a session, so that way the DM can prep for whatever chaos.
Yep. Yeah. I tend to be the step-in DM, and so like every time our DM wants a week off or she goes away and like maybe we
Okay,
want to do something different for a little while, I'll step in and sort of like run a one shot or a two shot as a sort of
nice,
a step-in kind of thing.
nice, hell yeah. What type of player? What's your main player right now? That your main character that you're playing?
It's a mechanical disaster, but it is his name is Tino Bearbloom, and grew up in extreme social isolation. Parents extremely rich, famous adventurers, and grew up entirely in a like effectively like a walled enclave with like very good private tutors. And then at some point, about 17 years old, sort of escaped to try and make his own name as an adventurer, trying not to let anybody know who his parents were. Started out as a fighter, got to about level 8 as a fighter, and then made friends with an ancient dragon, and our DM homebrewed a ancient dragon warlock packed.
Oh,
And
nice.
so now 4 levels of Warlock on top of the 8 levels of Fighter. So
Nice.
mechanically, absolute disaster. Doesn't that doesn't work together in the slightest. But I'm
Sure.
having a great time. And coincidentally, also as a were tiger.
Mm.
My character is horribly, horribly, horribly cursed. And like one of the key plot points is trying to figure out why this character and his entire family have been cursed. So very, very fun.
Nice. I like that. I had a character not dissimilar to that, but he started off as an arcane archer fighter, and then kind of metagaming. We didn't have a rogue. We didn't have a proper rogue, so I dipped into rogue and was an arcane trickster. So I was an arcane trickster, arcane archer,
Mhm.
and actually worked quite well. And then I got cursed with lycanthropy, and I became in tune with the werewolf. So I became more of like a shape changer to where I could turn into a wolf or werewolf form at will. But mechanically, I was like becoming weaker and weaker to where I was dex based, but then all my werewolf attacks were strength based,
Yep.
and so and then my ability scores didn't change, which I felt like was weird. Yeah, yeah. So every time you turn into a werewolf, his ability scores and skills would just be weak. So I never did that, but I would do like thematically, I would turn into a wolf while like prowling and stuff like that. And then we were playing Curse of Strahd, so not forgiving at all. And I then got attacked by a white bat, like a humanoid bat, and died. And then our cleric tried to res me, but due to us being in Barovia, he had like a special table to where it could be botched. It was botched, and so I became an undead werewolf fighter rogue, and I was like, this character is just really cool and, and totally like thematically on par, but mechanically kind of broken. But the archer rogue did play very well together, and it's nice because fighter and rogue are two classes you can dip into, and warlock to an extent. Like you can dip into those three classes, assuming your charisma is good. But it was a very interesting character.
Yeah, yeah, lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with that character. That sounds really, really fun.
Yeah,
But like, if
it's
you were
fun.
going to read about Dungeons and Dragons on the internet, no one would ever, on purpose, create a character like that.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like you create a character and you kind of imagine, like you said, you have a backstory. You kind of imagine where your character is going to progress, and then just through actions in the game, stuff completely goes haywire, and it develops and fleshes out this character into a way that I never would have done it organically. And so now I can use this character as an NPC in my games, which I have, and other ways. And it's really nice because you're again in a collaborative group effort to create and build this world and story and everything like that. And that's why I like D&D. It's the ultimate gateway drug, is what I say.
It is.
Uh,
It is.
cool. Perfect. Rory, we're at time, so I appreciate you hopping on. Why don't you kind of quickly drop how people can get a hold of you and follow you and all that?
Yeah, sure. So my handle is on Instagram and TikTok, Rory the Lynchpin. And Instagram probably the best way to get hold of me, unless you prefer email, in which case it's Rory at sisyphusstrength.com. Either of those is great.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I dropped you a follow on Instagram, and I'll have all the links in the description below. But again, I appreciate you hopping on. We had a good, interesting conversation. I love the journey that you're on because it sounds like you were able to take the plunge in ways that other people don't, and it has been very fruitful for you. So, obviously, wish you the best of luck moving forward, and I appreciate again you hopping on.
Thanks very much, Jordan. My pleasure.
Yep. Yep.